Hey everybody, this is Dan for StocksPoker.com, bringing you the next video in my PLO8 series. In today's video, I'm going to be playing two tables of full ring at 50 cents a dollar. And I've been getting a lot of requests for more live videos. My last couple have been mostly PowerPoint type stuff, and also requests for full ring. Historically, I've played mostly 6 max, but for some reason lately, a lot of the games I've been running have been full ring, so it's kind of good to go through and cover that. I'm also doing 2 tables instead of 4, like I've done before, to make it a little bit easier to follow. The other thing I did here by request is increase the font size on the HUD, so unfortunately it kind of covers up some of the players' information, but hopefully overall it makes it a little bit easier to see what's going on. So in this one I get a backdoor draw to the nut low and the naked ace of spades. Usually in PLO8 you don't, say the flush card comes, you don't want to go crazy bluffing the bare ace. Even in PLO high that doesn't work that well anymore, but in PLO8 it definitely doesn't work a lot because people are going to call you down with low draws and just all sorts of stuff. So there are some times where the bare ace bluff can be appropriate, but it doesn't come up super often. So looking around the table, some of the players we got, fortunately a lot of these players we have some decent hand samples on, so we should have a good idea what they're doing and how they're playing. And we've got sort of no real mega donks here. I don't see anybody with the 70 and 80 and 60 VPIPs, which is unfortunate. That may be because I'm taping this during the day and you've got kind of more regulars than you do at night. So as we go along here, some interesting hands come up. I can pull up Pro Poker Tools and run some equities and kind of see what everybody's doing and kind of show how what they're doing may be good or bad. My concern with doing full ring was that it would move too slow and there wouldn't be enough to talk about. As you know, in full ring you want to play pretty tight, especially from up front, and so sometimes that can make for some slow action. So this guy posted over here. Our hand is not a great one, but we do have a nut flush draw and a couple low cards. So I may raise to try to isolate him if he folds. Genova is super tight, so he's going to be folding a lot, and so is Protect Your Nuts. So these guys are so tight, we're going to really be going after their blinds. First of all, because most of the time they're going to fold, and second of all, if they play back at us, their ranges are really well defined because they play so few hands. So we're going to be able to play pretty well against them when they do come in the pot. And when they're in the blinds, we're going to have position on them. This one's worth a limp. Not a great hand that we want to be raising and really building too much of a pot. Although you could argue for a raise with that hand. And we totally whiffed this flop. One of the things that's kind of also true in 6 max, but it's definitely true in full ring, is you don't want to force things and trying to get too creative. I mean, if you just completely whiff a flop, most of the time it's going to be worth your while just to give up on the pot, especially when you're multi-way like this. Heads up can be a little bit different depending on your opponent. You can make some moves here and there, but full ring is more about just playing tight, and you're going to tend to be a lot more straightforward than you would be in 6 max. One of the reasons I personally prefer 6 max is just I find it a more interesting game. There are more opportunities to make moves, and there's generally a lot more going on. Full ring is a little bit more of a, I don't want to say a nut peddling game because I don't recommend just peddling the nuts, but definitely going to be playing quite a bit tighter. A little less room for creativity. And some of these players, you can see where they are definitely trying just to make the nuts and then get it in. And in the old days where we get trips here, this is, we flopped a good hand. I'll continue mine. Talk later. Okay. So anyways, peddling the nuts in full ring. It used to not be such a bad idea because you'd have a ton of players that would be playing 60, 70, 80% of their hands, and that could just never ever fold. And so in those days, you could sort of just limp with almost any four, try to flop the nuts, and then just bet for value the whole way, and that worked. That could be pretty profitable, and didn't really take a whole lot of thought or skill to make money. Now that you see all those players are kind of gone, it's not quite that easy. You still have players that are playing too many hands, but people just aren't quite stacking off with garbage the way they used to be. So I think you definitely want to be raising some hands. You want to be building pots when you're in position. And when you can get pots heads up, you want to be playing fairly aggressively. Done there. Aces, even without a low, this is a pretty strong hand. So he's got actually one of the wider ranges at 34-10. That, well, so I mean, typically he's only raising 6% of hands to begin with, and he 3-bet out of the small blind. We're never folding, but there's a good chance he has the other two aces. So we're going to be looking for high cards on the flop, which we don't get. That's a really bad flop for us because there's a diamond draw we don't have and a low draw that we don't have. I hesitate to bluff here because when someone 3-bets, they're usually peeling one off, and that turn card is horrific. That sucks. So, but if we had gotten a flop with some high cards where maybe, you know, we had our aces and some kind of Broadway draw, we could have gotten it in this, you know, we may have been able to get it in really good against the other two aces. It's possible he had other stuff too, like an ace deuce or something like that, but not too many players are 3-betting without aces, especially out of the small blind, and not a guy that's only raising 7% of his hands to begin with. I mean, he's mostly raising aces with a few other strong hands, so people generally have really, really, really narrow 3-bet ranges. It's usually premium aces for the most part. If we get blind on blind, we can raise this. Anything else, though, we're not really looking to raise it out of the blinds. That's a good flop. That's a really good flop. What does he have behind him? Yeah. We're like pretty much never folding this. Beautiful. Hope he shows us Broadway here. Might have sucked out on him on the river. And that's usually, that's got to be Jack 10. Set of kings. Wow. could have gotten away from that on the turn. I mean, when I bet the flop and bet the turn, it's kind of looking like I have a straight, and then when I bet the river, I mean, I've got to have at least a straight or, you know, hit a diamond draw that I was betting. So you really should have given up on that one by the river. But one of the good, you know, this guy's playing 23-1. One of the good things about nits is generally they play tight. They wait and wait and wait for good hands, but when they get good hands, they don't necessarily want to give up on them, especially flop sets. And we are, so for heads up and he checked to me here, I'm just going to stab with my one pair. This hand is not great. It's a little tempting because I'm on the button, but three wheel cards we can peel here from the small blind. In general, I recommend playing super tight from the small blind. It's one of the big pre-flop leaks people have because you're getting such good pot odds and it's a split pot game, and people find all kinds of ways to rationalize playing hands, but if your hand isn't nutty, generally it's best just to let it go. Could be some excitement in this one since the flush and the low both hit on the turn. More than likely you'll see a bet and a call here. And then again, maybe not. A little surprised to see that was kind of an action card on the turn. So Bear Kings, we are on the button. We don't have a low, which kind of sucks. When you're playing full ring, you end up with a lot of multi-way pots, so it's hard to get your big pairs to hold up in multi-way pots. We flop trips. I like kings a lot better when it's short-handed. Their value goes way up as you get short-handed. Full ring, they can be tough to play. Wow, this guy's... This kind of sucks if he makes another... That's... So, I'm going to rep a jack. Just need to try to get him off of an ace-9. That little bet just reeks of weakness. I mean, he's saying he doesn't like that river card. I probably should have bet more. Alright. So the reason we were betting there, we weren't betting for value. We were betting because we knew that he didn't like his hand. And there's a decent chance that he could have shown up with an ace-9. He also could have had a busted straight draw on there, but when he bets 12 into the $42 pot, after betting the rest of the way, he's basically saying, I don't like my hand. If he had been betting a jack, like if he had been stubborn, saying, well, you know, it's a paired board, I don't think the other guy has a 9. And if he was betting that jack the whole way and then made another jack on the river, he probably would have made a bigger bet, hoping that I did have a 9 and would call him down. So our river bet there just had more to do with the way the hand played out and how it just really looked like he didn't like his hand. Although that's definitely not a foolproof thing. People will always surprise you in this game. There's something I call the banana factor, which is the probability that someone will show up with like a completely bizarre hand that doesn't make any sense. I think PL08 definitely has, as a game, has a very big banana factor. But overall, I think our river bet there was plus EV. because he just showed so much weakness. It's hard for him to have anything. Counterfeited 2-pair. There's nowhere to go in this hand. I mean, we're just kind of giving up. Make jacks and tens. There's actually a good chance here we have the best hand, but I don't know what anybody can call us with that's worse. This guy's got a little bit of aggression to him. You know, he might be able to pick off a bluff or something. What the hell did he have? Queens. Yeah. Oh, and he had the nut flush draw too on the turn. Yeah, the other thing too is when the pot's small. I think was it an old Doyle quote or something where he talks about not going broke in a limp pot. When you have the small pots, people can show up with just about anything, and there's not that much to gain. So I'm going to be more prone to kind of letting things go with marginal hands in a small pot than I am with the big one. The big ones I'm going to tend to fight for a little bit more because it's more worth your while to fight for them. So when Big Nella raises, he's kind of repping a set, which, although there's a million draws out there, so he could also have a big draw. He could have like a diamond draw with a good low draw or something. And Genova's pretty tight. So that's a good guy to raise on a lot of flops because you're going to know where you are. If he doesn't have anything, he's going to give up, and if he's got the nuts, he's going to jam. So it's going to tend to be fairly easy to play against because we're going to usually know right where we stand against them. Although having said all that, I think he's a winner overall. I mean, he's not going to be drawing to bad stuff post flop, and he's going to get in there against donks and value bet. I'm not super thrilled with this hand. Over to the gun, we're sort of just set mining here. But we're getting the odds to do it. Yeah, that's no good. Three-handed, we can bet this with our two not so great draws. Big Nella. He's only raising 7%. I don't know about trying to 3-bet and isolate there. Paired boards are always good. Paired boards without low draws are always good ones to bluff into. If we get called, the only thing we got going for us is our backdoor heart draw on a paired board, which is not real good, so... That's my BlackBerry. Sorry about that. Whenever you have a pair of nines, that's usually pretty bad, unless you got a pair of aces or something to go with it. I got a poster up here that's always telling sign of kind of a donk. Queens and fours. So he did that again. I mean, he's kind of repping aces. It's going to be aces a lot of the time, so we're just kind of Calling here to try to hit a set on him. And we don't, so we're just giving that up. I think that's aces a huge percent of the time. One of the cool things when people have fairly tight raising ranges, it's great when someone has a tight raising range and they just are almost turning aces face up. You can call with a lot of hands. I mean, if you have any kind of nut potential, you can call and try to crack aces because usually people don't want to give up on them once they have them. Much wheel cards, which is nice. You know, the downside of this hand is our ace isn't suited and we don't have any big cards to go with it, so definitely a strong hand, no doubt, but we're not really looking to build a pot out of the blinds with it. With that. Yeah, like, you know, he doesn't call here without a flush, and most of the time he doesn't have a flush, so we can go ahead and bet. Check, check. Sorry about the HUD obscuring some of the stack sizes. I don't know how to fix that. If anybody knows how to fix that, if you could send me a PM, I'd appreciate it. I'm still relatively new to Hold'em Manager. I don't quite have it all figured out yet, and I've been too lazy to do it. So here we can definitely call that. Gutter ball, flush draw we don't have, so we're not gonna get crazy there. Although Little Big Nell has raised several pots here lately, so he may be, you know, these stats are from a past session. He may be playing looser today than he's done before, so that may be a little bit deceptive. So here we've got kind of blocking the ace of hearts, which is not the only reason we're betting, but it's helpful. This one, alright, I wasn't even paying attention to what was going on over here, so second nut flush draw and open ender, we can bet. All of a sudden everybody's sat out over here. I'm not sure what's going on with that. There's a good turn to barrel on the board pairs. All the low draws missed, flush draws missed. If he has a set, or if he boated up, he'll usually let us know. Wow, that was a quick check. We're going to fire one more. Nice. He checks so fast on the river. So let's look at that again. So here you've got low draws and flush draws, which all miss, and those missed low and flush draws are a much bigger part of his range than actually having a 4. And it seemed like if he had a 4, you know, I've been betting the whole way. A lot of people will check there and try to trap, or they'll bet, but usually they'll stop and think about it a little bit if they make quads on the river. So when he just insta-checked, that's kind of indicative of having missed a draw. So because I had showed so much strength throughout the hand, I mean, it totally fits that I would be having a 4 there. And I didn't full pot, you know, to make it look super bluffy, I think it was about a 2/3 size pot bet, which is generally what a lot of people would do with the nuts there. So I think the story added up to him likely having a draw, and our repping a 4 kind of made sense. When you do bluff, you don't want to bluff in spots where the story just doesn't add up to where you could have that hand. There are actually lots of opportunities to bluff in PL08, probably more than some people realize. Some people think because everybody always has something that you don't have opportunities to bluff and you should just try to make the nuts, but that's not really the case. There are lots of good spots, but you just want to do it in the right spots. And so far in this session, they all seem to be working out. I don't mean to give the impression that every time you bluff a river, it's going to work. I definitely get picked off quite a bit. But overall, you just want to recognize those plus EV spots and take advantage of them where you can. It's a great hand on the button. We're definitely raising that. When it folds to us, we're going to be raising a ton of hands on the button, particularly with these two really tight players on our left. Protecting nuts, I don't even know if I've seen him play a hand in this session. I haven't really noticed. Ah, beautiful. So, this is one where, what stack does he have? Small stack, so gonna 3-bet and get it in on basically any flop against this guy. Another short stack, so he folds. That's weird, the min raise fold. Usually min raising a lot of times makes our min raising can mean a lot of things from different players, but if you don't know anything about the player just in general, a lot of times it means something really strong. A lot of times it means aces, because people who, well, this guy's raising 15% of their hands, but a lot of your players who will just tend to limp most all their hands, when they get aces, they want to raise, but they don't want to raise full pot because they're trying to be nitty. And so they compromise to just have a min raise. Oh, okay. Thought I might have made a straight there for a second. So a lot of times the min raise means a big hand. So I thought he might have been wanting to get it in there with me. Although the other reason for min raising, which I've talked about before and I've talked about a lot in my book, is it's kind of helpful too in these full ring games where if you have a pretty strong hand that's nutty, but maybe it's more nutty just in one direction, you can min raise as just a pot sweetener. And then what that does is it makes it easier for you to get your whole stack in. But I don't know if his situation that really made any sense, because he's only got 23 big blinds, so you min raise to try to sweeten the pot and make it easier to get your stack in when you've got like 100 big blinds, not when you've got 20, because when you got 20, if you hit the flop hard, you're going to be able to get all your money in usually anyways, so there's no real reason to do that. So I'm not sure what he was doing there. The min raise fold was kind of odd. Would have expected him to either min raise and then get it in, or just limp fold instead of min raise fold. It's kind of strange. So here's another good button hand. So this time he limps. Kind of go after him. $20. Limp fold. Wow, that is really weird stuff. So if he's going to play that weak against us, we're going to attack him. Definitely don't want Janoba limping in on the button. Raise to kind of knock him out, and that sucks. So here's a dude who's raising 1% of his hands. So in 260 hands, he's raised basically about 2 of them, and now he's limp re-raised us, or limp 3-bet us, whatever. So that pretty much shouts aces at the top of his lungs. So we can call this, but if we call, there's going to be a pot of 30. And there's going to be 78 left. I don't know if we're getting the implied odds to try to stack aces. It's probably fairly close. We got the 1 flush draw. I'm going to let that go. So we get the bare open ender in the top pair. No diamonds. We can peel one here. This hand, I'm going to let go. I've been fairly active. Hope our kings hold up. Well, they do. Oh, he must have had a busted diamond draw over here. So let's go back again and take a look at this other hand. What am I doing? Did I get the wrong table? No, this one. So, oops. Limp. Yeah, limp re-raise usually screams aces. Kind of reminds me of the Rolf Slotboom strategy from his PLO book. So like I said, a lot of times when people turn aces face up, I like to call them and try to stack them. But the thing is, I usually like to do that in smaller pots. I mean, here it's a 3-bit pot. We're getting a lot of money in. There's not a lot of money behind. I'd have to do a little work to see if I think that makes sense or not to do it. It's probably fairly close, and I think it's just a lower variance line just to give it up here and let him take 4.5 big blinds from us when he's got aces versus our kings. I don't think there's anything really wrong with giving up there. So over here we got 2 pair plus nut low draw. He bets pot. So he had raised pre-flop, full pot, and I'm wondering if we didn't possibly outflop aces. What has he got behind? 450. Okay, so now we're in. I should have just stuck it in there with him. And again, I apologize for my silly HUD setup. Yeah, we outflopped aces. Actually, I had aces with the ace-3, so if I'd been able to see that he was so short, I just would have stuck it in there on that flop instead of flatting with 4 big blinds left. That's a weird min raise from him that is kind of saying aces, but we've got a pretty nutty hand. Although we do not outflop aces, so we're going to check fold this. Our gutter ball with a flush draw that we don't have is not very good. And just given what I know about him, I think he shows up with aces quite a bit there. It's a problem when people play that tight. I mean, don't just give your money to a player that's tight in what can be sort of a marginal spot. You know, just wait until you get to situations where you crack their aces and they can't let it go. You actually get plenty of shots even against tight players. So this one we're giving up. We got the ace-6, but you can't make the nut low with an ace-6, and we don't have any kind of nut flush draw. The 9-high spade draw is no good. So even though we're going to play a lot more obviously have way more hands on the button than we will in other spots. There's no reason to go crazy. This high only hand with that's full of gaps is no good either. Although I do hate the fold hands from the button and the cutoff. In general, it's something I try to avoid, but you don't want to get spewy either in these games. There are lots of good EV spots. You don't need to force the issue. I think where I've gotten in trouble when I've had bad sessions playing full ring is because I've played primarily 6 max and try to play a somewhat aggressive style, maybe somewhat more so than most players. Is I play full ring and I start getting bored because it goes kind of slow, and my naturally a little bit more aggressive tendencies kind of come out, and I start trying to force the issue in some different spots, and that's a good way to run into the nuts repeatedly. So for full ring, you've really just got to kind of keep things under control and just be very, very, very patient. And the way that I generally combat that is just to open up more tables so that there's always something going on. But for the sake of the video, we're only playing 2. But luckily we're catching some decent hands here, so we've been able to play some pots and hopefully kept it somewhat interesting. Yeah, I've actually playing 32-19 on this table. That's really an unusual. I think that's more just the fact that the cards that I'm getting and the fact that I got 2 giant nits on my left that I can try to fold out all the time. In the long run, I would definitely not recommend playing 32-19 in full ring. I think that's a way to lose money, but I think there's just a little bit of the table dynamics and the cards that I've been getting over this short sample. Over here, the 22-11 is going to be a lot more representative of my long-term stats. The aggression factor 6 is pretty through the roof too. Normally, you're not going to be doing that. I think over here, the stats I'm showing here are a lot more representative. Although I'm going to be c-betting a lot more than 25% of the hands. You're not going to be folding to c-bet 100% of the time. So you need a lot more hands for the continuation bet and fold to continuation bet stats to make any sense. So when the board pairs a turn and he checks, Genova should definitely be betting here. I think one of the bigger mistakes most players make post-flop, once you get beyond the... did he have the... Let's take a look at this hand real quick. So he had bare aces. So when the board pairs the turn and Big Nella checks to him, I would be betting there with aces like 100% of the time. One, he's got the nut flush draw. And, you know, yeah, it's possible the guy already has a straight, but better set. We're not going to get crazy here with bottom set. But he should have been betting that turn 100% of the time, even without the nut flush draw. If you just had, say, the bare aces with no flush draw, I'd still be betting in that scenario on the turn because basically all the draws have missed. I mean, yeah, there's a made straight possible, but generally, like I was starting to say before, one of the biggest post-flop mistakes people make, once they get past the point where they're not making like the big obvious mistakes, like drawing for half the pot and just chasing things that they shouldn't be chasing or going crazy with second best flushes and stuff like that. I think one of the places where people lose a lot of EV is not barreling turns enough. There are a lot of spots where you need to be barreling the turn. And might be in the next video. Well, actually, it's probably going to be a couple videos down, just to give you kind of a preview of what's coming. So I think the video after this is going to be another PowerPoint type one where I talk about more of the post-flop basics, when to draw, when not to draw, and stuff like that. And then probably some more playing videos, and then I'm going to have another one where I get into more of the, I don't know if I'd even call it advanced post-flop play, but more talking about when to bluff, when not to bluff, when to barrel, And I've also had some hands lately where I've had some good 3-barrel bluffs, which don't come up very often in PLO8. But lately, for some reason, I've had a couple situations where that's come up, and probably talk about that as well. Because as we've seen this progression in the game from just loose passive donkeys that you can exploit by pedaling the nuts, you know, that doesn't work anymore. You don't see as many of those uber donks. So now more of your basic post-flop skills come into play. So down the road we'll be talking about what cards are good to barrel and which ones aren't, and get a little bit more in depth into hand reading. Double suited kings we can raise. Although this is a hand that's pretty vulnerable, so it's definitely a hand we're going to win money with over time. We're going to want to play, but we're not going to want to get too berserk with it if someone wants to play a big pot with us. Three wheel cards. You really need ace deuce to flop, which is not going to happen very often. I'm just going to let that go, although you can argue for a call. Especially since these guys are like almost never going to raise behind me. When we get through playing here, I've got, we'll go back in and take a look at our session stats and talk about that a little bit, what we did and what we didn't do. Might be worth looking at that one again. Oh, what happened? Oh. It's not up there yet. So the ace, king, jack, 7. It's not a bad hand, but we're kind of in middle position in full ring. I'm not a big fan of it. We're not going to have any kind of nut flush draw, and our ace 7 draw is pretty poopy. You know, you're really trying to make Broadway with that kind of hand, which is not going to happen very often. Here, no reason to get sucked into calling there, especially under the gun raise. So here we got someone playing 80% of their hands, even though it's only through 16. But if someone is going to just play almost every single hand, you don't have to get that many hands on them until it gets apparent that that's what they're doing. If someone's playing really donkish, usually you find out pretty quickly. So we're going to keep our eye on him. If he's going to be limping every pot, we're going to really be wanting to raise and isolate him and get him heads up to ourselves. Alright, so when he bets 20 on the end, you know, his aggression factor is 0.5. He's saying he's got like Broadway every time, so let's see what he actually... Yeah, he did. So, of course, yeah, they end up chopping, so... Anyways, if you're him, you basically can't call without Broadway as well. Of course, he had it. So the action is slowing down a little bit here now. Hopefully we pick up a few more interesting hands, and then I didn't pay attention to exactly what time I started the video. I think I might be about 50 minutes in or so. So we'll play here for a few more minutes, maybe do one more orbit or so, and then shut it down and just take a look at our session results. Or stats, not the results. We don't care about the results over an hour of play. Yeah, it's a nice hand. So this is a beautiful hand. I love this on the button. Under the gun, we still got to be a little bit careful. We don't like want to 3-bet it. We almost never 3-bet out of the blinds. I wouldn't say never, but I would say almost never. Because you hate to bloat pots, and then the thing about this hand is usually it's hard for one player to scoop you. You're usually going to have it in one side or the other. Let's get $18. So heads up in position is pretty beautiful, so we can just pound, pound, pound. And your limp folding is pretty weak. Usually if you're in the small blind and it folds to you, you don't generally want to limp with the intention of folding to a raise, unless you've got some people that are really tight sitting on your left. Top pair against 4 people, even though we got position against that many players, flush draws, and there's probably better low draws out. We're just going to be content to check our top pair, top kicker. Now here, I'm just going to let that go. He could just be taking a weird stab with that, but I'm not going to bother with it. I mean, if our call is with ace-king there is good, it's going to be, oops, not stand up. Let me do that. When he bets that on the end, he could just be doing that because he's seen all the weakness and he's seen all the draws miss, and he only bet like half pot, but that also looks kind of like he's trying to sucker somebody in to call him. So if our top pair, top kicker call is good there in the long run, it's barely good. And this flop we whiff, so this is one of those where no need to be stubborn. We got a gut shot draw, we got a backdoor low draw. Just kind of see what happens. This is one of those situations where if you make a bet, like if you bet pot as a bluff, it really doesn't make any sense. You're kind of just saying, hey, I have a king. This is one too, man, it's so tempting just to bet pot, but against 4 players, usually somebody's going to call you. He had a 9. 9s and 6s. Yeah, I mean, I guess given what everybody actually had, we probably could have gotten away with something there, but like queens and jacks will call you though a lot of times too in that situation, so we want to make sure that our bluff situations make sense. Tend to do it when we're heads up and we're actually been representing something that we could credibly have. Not just random spew bluffs into 4 people in general. That's not going to work out too well. So I think we're going to sit out when the blinds come out and come around again. So overall, we had a good session of results. I'd say in general, we had tables of players that are a little tighter than what you normally see. Usually you do see more of the donks like this with the really big VPIPs. We've had, for the most part, a bunch of nitty regulars, but fortunately we picked up some kind of interesting hands. I'm actually just going to sit out of these. I think we're pretty much done. So here are stats from today. I had some other hands earlier where I started the video and had some technical difficulties, but so we're playing 25-13. That's ignore these 25-50 hands that was from earlier. That was at these were actually at 6 max, so it's kind of funny. I actually played looser at full ring than I did at 6 max, but I think that was just because we happened to pick up a bunch of cards, a bunch of good cards, and 3-betting 7%, that like never happens at full ring. So these stats aren't really totally representative of our full ring stats. I think in the longer term you're going to see 20, 22 and 10 to 12 on the pre-flop raise, and the 3-betting is going to be pretty small, just generally because you don't get a lot of opportunities to 3-bet in full ring. See what we did as far as one of the other things I always look at is my flop c-bet and turn c-bet. 55% for the flop, that's generally about typical. And then turn c-bet of 100 is just a matter of a small sample. Usually it's never ever that high, although I think the turn c-bet is something you want to watch, and in general I like to have it over 50%. I think one of the big leaks, like I was mentioning earlier in the video, is among players who are kind of decent is they tend to c-bet a lot of flops, and then when they get called they sort of shut down on the turn unless they have the nuts, and I think that's a big mistake. If you have the nuts on the turn, you definitely want to be c-betting there, but I think there are a lot of cards that if you look at the draws that your opponent could have, and when all those draws miss, you're going to be wanting to follow through on a lot of turns, because a lot of players will call a lot of flop c-bets just because they've always got, they always have a little bit of something. So one of the other things that a lot of players do is they'll be really loose on calling bets on the flop, but then they also shut down on the turn. So remember to barrel more turns, and in the future videos I'll get into a lot more detail about exactly the whens and whys of how you do that. So hope you enjoyed this video. Please post in the forums or send me PMs if you've got any questions about anything, and hopefully this helped you out, and I will see you next time.